Hey everyone, welcome to the Beyond the Finish Line podcast. My name is Dave Nolan. I am your host. I'm an Olympic team alternate in swimming who has transitioned into Silicon Valley to help build startups using product management and sales as my core skills. I'm here interviewing former elite athletes who have transitioned into becoming elite career people. And today my guest is Duke Rohlen, who started as a tennis player as a kid, became nationally ranked, suffered a career-ending injury, but didn't let that stop him. He continued on to eventually become a master in MedTech. He figured out how to increase the efficiency of starting a medical technology and bringing it to market. So what makes Duke amazing is his capacity for doing so many great things for great people. He has a family with 5 kids, and he was the CEO of 3 different companies when I first met him. All of those companies exited, and he didn't stop there. He started a hedge fund that is completely revolutionizing the entire medical technology founding model and figured out how to commercialize more medical technologies even faster. Duke is a master at managing time. He's also a master leader. And today we talk about both of those things in depth. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Duke Rohlen. Duke, so excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
So this is going to be a super interesting conversation because you were an athlete growing up. You've worked with a ton of athletes over time. And I'm assuming you've actually learned a lot from them as they've learned from you and how to kick ass beyond sports. So you're the perfect person to come on the show and teach us how to apply the skills that you learn in athletics to your careers. And I'm really excited to jump into later in the episode what I like to call the quotient compass, which is a teaser, but it's what, you have developed this beautiful framework, measuring yourself, being your own coach over time. So I'm really excited about that. But let's rewind all the way to the beginning of Duke Rohlen and learn how you got into sports in the first place and how they kind of shaped you over time.
Yeah. So I grew up in a super athletic family. Everybody was doing all sorts of sports: swimming, tennis, skiing, track. And I had 6 siblings. And so I think it was my parents' way of just getting us out of each other's hair, put us out on the field and let us do something, like a way to, take stress off. And that's been actually a constant between growing up playing sports and continuing to play sports now. I was a tennis player, so I was a super competitive tennis player and uh, highly ranked. And then I ended up with a bunch of knee problems when I was 15. So my career was cut short immediately. I had ended up having like 8 knee surgeries on my left knee and had to really reorient to a new sport. Went through the whole demoralization of having an identity tied to sports and then having it abruptly shut off. And the only thing I could really do was swim. So I started swimming. Obviously, too late to try and swim in college. But the great thing about getting old and the great thing about doing something for a long time is you actually catch up to the athletes that were elite in college, especially if they start falling off. So I'm still not a length behind you, Dave. I hope to be a length behind you soon. But
You're pretty close.
that's where sports became a big part of mine. And then I've got a bunch of kids. I got 5 kids. They're all D1 athletes. So obviously, sports has been important for me, not only in terms of my development and what it's brought to me in terms of a career, but it's also been an important way to help raise kids that have discipline and some grit and morals and standards that I think athletes represent.
So let's actually jump into some of those learnings. A couple of learnings that I took away, and I obviously don't have any kids yet, but I took away competitiveness, leadership, teamwork as a couple of the major lessons. But can you touch on the lessons that you feel like have really stuck with you over time, or maybe have grown into these beautiful things that you've taught your kids and you use in work?
Yeah. So obviously, teamwork, leadership, discipline are really important. There's other aspects of it. So one of the things I focus on in life is communication, right? And school teaches you how to communicate verbally. Reading teaches how to you learn to read and you learn to write by going to school. What you don't learn a lot in school is how to communicate through interpersonal connectivity, like the way you hold yourself, the way you relate to other people. There's a big part of that comes from sports, right? It's not just listening to someone yell at you or trying to tell someone else to do it. It's reading the body language of your fellow athletes and knowing when you need to inspire them, knowing when they need to inspire you, knowing when they need a kick in the pants, knowing when you need a kick in the pants. And that comes from the interconnectivity of communication that's not taught. So in an academic framework where everybody's learning and being taught things, one of the things that sports does is it gives you a venue where you learn to communicate in the way that life communicates, right? Which is not in an academic setting. I think the other thing, it teaches humility, right? So there's always someone better. There's always someone faster. And I have a framework where I look at impact that you can have over time. And if you imagine the y-axis being impact, and you imagine the x-axis being time, you start with being pretty not good at something, right? And your impact is low, and I call that the grind phase. And then you go to a phase where you get a little bit better, and your impact goes up, and the time frame in which your impact goes up goes down. And I call that the growth phase. And then you get to a point where you're good enough phase, right? And you're sort of moving along at a pretty good clip, and your impact is high. But what separates the good from the elite, both in sports and in business and in academics, is how do you get into that elite phase, right? How do you get to that highest level? And if you think about athletes and if you think about sports, what they constantly remind you is you can't be good enough. You have to strive for elite, and you always have to try and stay in there. And it's the inertia, the gravity is always trying to pull you out. So sports teaches you that elite is not a noun, it's a verb. It's not a static condition, it's a perpetual quest for something. Sports teaches you that, right? Because there's always someone coming down your back trying to beat you, which I really respect. So there's a humility associated with yourself. There's another thing which I think about too, which is that sports gives you a binary outcome that allows you to assess whether you win or lose, right? And in life, that becomes much more nebulous. You don't really see people saying, okay, you won or you lost. But if you have that clarity of winners and losers, and you hold yourself accountable to that standard, which comes to a certain extent from having experiences like in athletics, where you either get the time or you don't in the pool, you can hold yourself to a standard that is a little bit lost in the world, right? And that translates very, very effectively to business.
So let's talk about that a little bit. This success idea in sports is very clear. Tennis, you're trying to go and win Wimbledon. In swimming, you're trying to make the Olympics and get gold. And like you said, it becomes really nebulous how to be successful and how to be elite. And you have to kind of choose when you're done with college and athletics. Here's the career that I want to go and chase after and try to be elite in.
Yeah. So one of the things I find really interesting about sports is that sports really require three things, right? Athletic capability, right? You don't have to have it, but to become pretty good or even get to the good enough or the elite level, you got to have an innate capability. You can't be tripping over your feet. The second thing it requires is discipline, right? I'm willing to put in the time. I'm willing to work outside of hours. Practice outside of practice. Those concepts make a lot of sense. And to become really good at it, you got to do that. The third thing, you get a coach, right? So someone's telling you what to do. The biggest challenge between transitioning from athletics, whether you're in college or you're in high school, to non-athletics, in this case, from going from college to a career, is you don't have a guide, right? You don't have somebody saying, okay, go do 2100s on the 115. You have someone saying, great job on those 2100s and the 115. Great, you were good for my team. Good luck in life. And so it forces the person to sort of say, how do I make sense of this? What do I do next? And for people that have been scripted as an athlete, a lot of time that's really disconcerting because they've known exactly what to do in school to be successful. They've known exactly what to do in sport to be successful. And if you combine, again, the athletic capability plus the grit plus the tutoring and the ability to take guidance from a coach, you can be successful, right? That does not translate to a career, right? Nobody's going to tell you how to curate a really successful career. So you find all these athletes who have been super elite and super, super successful, really confounded with their lives by the time they're done with college. And they're sitting there saying, gosh, I want something that fired me up like sports did. I want something that gave me this sense of purpose like sports did. I want something that effort in translates to output. And it's not there. You have to sort of figure out how to make that work. That's why I came up with this concept of the 4Qs, right? Which is what you call the quotient concept or the quotient compass, which I think is a better name than the 4Qs. Basically, the 4Qs are an assessment of IQ. And IQ to me is not like how smart are you, right? Innately. IQ is how good are you at a designated focus area. The second part of IQ is how good are you at connecting the dots from one focus area to something else, right? And the third thing is how good are you and how effectively can you communicate simply what you were doing really well and why, and how what you were doing really well and why can translate to something else, right? So that's IQ. EQ is not can we talk and like have a beer together and socialize and feel good about each other. EQ to me is really three things. Can you take accountability for yourself and put accountability on your back? Can you be the guy who raises their hand and says, you know what, I'm going to take on that project? Or on the team, you know what, I'm going to pull the Kobe Bryant and I'm going to actually score that winning basket in order to take us to the championship. The second is, can you handle the stress associated with that accountability, both on the positive and the negative? Meaning, can you make the shot and feel good about taking the shot? And can you feel good about yourself if you miss the shot and feel responsible for yourself and only yourself for missing that shot? And then the third thing is, can you lead under that duress, right? Can you actually galvanize people around you that recognize your IQ capabilities and recognize that you're taking accountability on your back, you're willing and capable of managing the risk associated with that accountability, and therefore you're galvanizing support for what you do. That's IQ and EQ. Very different construct of how traditionally IQ and EQ are framed and understood to be. However, the two most important quotients that really tie into what we're talking about, transitioning from a career in sports to a career in academics. The third one is ingenuity quotient. An ingenuity quotient is like the ideation quotient, which is you sit down in front of a desk with nothing to do, no coach telling you how to do something, no mentor telling you what to do, and you start curating a path based on your own capabilities, right? You take something from 0 to 1, right? It's the people that can think outside the box. It's the people that can think about different constructs, relate things to what they've done historically, whether it's through things they've read about, people they've interacted with, experiences they've had, one of those being sports, etc. But be able to create something that's valuable for you and for your life from nothing, right? And then the last one, which goes hand in hand, it's like the brother of ingenuity quotient, is consistency quotient. No matter how good your ideas are, if you don't systematically execute them to an endpoint, which is the consistency quotient, if you're not like relentlessly diligent in terms of getting those ideas through to an end zone, ideation or ingenuity quotient is immaterial. So how does that relate to going from sports to life? Well, when you go to, in your case, Stanford, or my case, Stanford, or you go to any program where you're an elite college athlete, you've got to be thinking about the next step, right? Because just like taking a company public, you think, okay, my goal is to take a company public. When you take a company public, all you're doing is getting funding to continue to grow the company, right? People say, gosh, I want to swim in the Olympics, or I want to play water polo in the Olympics. Congratulations, that's great, right? How is that experience, right? How is that going to translate to something you can do after that? The Olympics are not the end point. They're one part of a life that needs to be really great, right? And so what I try and encourage people that work with me to do is say, okay, great, like we're going to go public, but that's not this. The clock doesn't stop once we go public. It actually starts, right? Because then we have accountability. We have to figure out how we create value after we've sold the shares to the public company. Same thing with athletes, right? It's like when you come into Stanford, you've got to start saying, okay, like what do I need to do, right? I'm doing 25, 30 hours a week of training. Well, that's going to make me a really good athlete. But how am I going to translate those skills, right? Connect the dots from what I'm doing and the capabilities I'm getting right now to a career. How do I work outside of practice to make sure that when that bell stops, like when my college career and my athletic career, whether it's college or pro or whatever, is over, I have the capabilities and I have a curated strategy to go to the next stage. That's the ingenuity.
That's fantastic. And I like to think of that as almost my coach outside of, swimming, is how am I doing on these four axes? And of course you have to have the discipline and the resolve to go out and say, here are the strategies to make progress in each of these categories. How do you track that over time? And I guess it kind of comes down to, do you have any level of accountability for yourself?
That's right.
And the focus aspect on those things seems to be kind of quintessential to the success. And you can get really distracted by having 10 things that you think are super urgent, very important, right? If you're thinking about the Eisenhower matrix or any of those prioritization frameworks. My question is, if you have a million things that seem to be like, each one of these things is going to level me up on each of those axes, how do I decide this is the one that I'm going to go and do next? How do you prioritize your time?
So first you have to decide what you want, right? And the great thing about athletes is they've tasted success and they've been compelled to try and achieve at that level, right? And then you have to say, okay, do I want to go to the next level in life, right? Or was that a period of time that I'm good at, and now I want to like drink beer and walk my dog and have a 9 to 5 job? Some people do that, but if you don't want to be that guy, right? If you want to be the guy who's going to have the same level of intensity and success in a career, you got to set the table for that. And then what you need to do is you need to do a very, very strenuous and honest self-assessment, almost a critical audit of yourself, and look at where you are on the IQ. Those three things I talked about IQ. Where are you, right? Well, gosh, I really understand swimming, right? But I don't know how to connect the dots to something else. Or I really understand swimming and I'm connecting the dots, but I'm shy as hell and I'm not good at communicating. You got to optimize for what you're weak at and make that better. And then you have to lean into the strengths, right? You have to do that with EQ as well. You have to do that with ingenuity quotient. What I find most people do is they say, gosh, outside of a coaching situation, I have no idea what to do. Right? Well, gosh, get busy and figure out how you can create the entrepreneurial piece of that, right? And then most athletes have the consistency quotient. But quite frankly, the consistency quotient is easy when someone's telling you what to do. It's harder when you wake up on a Monday morning without a job and say, I got to get a job, right? You got to create that. You got to create your own accountability there. To me, if you framework your life with these quotient compass and you're constantly working to improve each component of that, you find your good things happen, right? Because you're working on yourself, you're working on your career. And if you're honest with yourself and honest with the other people that are thinking about hiring you, people respect it. If someone came into me at my office and said, here's my framework for life, I'm going to look at myself. I look at the IQ, EQ, IQ2, and CQ. Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I'm not good at. Here's what I'll bring to the table for you, even though I've been a competitive athlete for 4 years and have had no internships. Here's what I'm going to develop while I'm working with you. And here's what you can expect from me on the consistency quotient. I'd hire that person, right? Because they have a clear and disciplined understanding of what they've done. They're able to articulate what they got from sports and how what they got from sports fits into a framework of like overall capability. And they're clear about it's again the clarity of communication. They're clear about what they can do now and what they will be able to do. That gives an enormous amount of comfort to someone who's looking to hire you.
Yeah. And when you have a family, you have this high octane job, you're running, a hedge fund, private equity shop, you're selling companies, buying companies, growing companies, and you have 5 kids. And I've observed this personally, a fantastic father, a fantastic husband. How do you make trade-offs between like, oh, I'm going to go and invest all of this time over here into my passion and my business, and I also want to invest time into my family and my wife? How do you think about those? Or is it more harmonious where they both kind of work together?
It's a great question, and thank you for the compliment. I think my kids would all say the same about you. They love you and think you're a great guy. Um, Except for maybe Wilkes, who doesn't quite know you as well as Luke does. But um,
He's over
uh,
6 feet tall now, right?
he's 6'2". He's 6'2" and a goalie, a
Good.
water polo goalie. So everything in life has trade-offs, right? So just like I said, you have to decide if you want to be a success after sports or not. You have to decide what's important to you. And I made that very clear prioritization being one, my family. Like I value my relationship with my wife. I value my relationship with my kids. I want to be a great husband and I want to be a great dad, right? The second thing was my health. Like that's how I got to know you because I still train, I still swim. And we could talk about that later, why I continue to do that. And then the third thing is my business, right? Literally that prioritization happens. So what's not in that, right? I sacrifice boys' weekends. You'll never find me going to surf in Costa Rica with 10 guys, right? Not because I don't want to, but because I have made the clear prioritization of I want to be an amazing dad and husband, as good as I can be. I want to be healthy. Like I don't want to be drinking on boys' weekends because that takes away from my ability to be a dad. It takes away from the precious time I have with my wife and kids. And I've also made the priority that like I want to be a role model for those kids, which is what being healthy does. And then work. One of the great things about work, and this is lost, is that families, wives, husbands, they understand when you work because what you're doing is working for them. Right? It doesn't mean you can work all the time. It doesn't mean that you can work till 6 and then go have vodka tonics till 8 and then come home. That's not work. That's like BS, right? But when you have to travel and when you have to be gone, kids understand the difference between going on a father's, on a boys' trip and going on a business trip. The boys' trip is for you. The business trip is for the family. I do the same thing with my work, right? Like I work really hard and I'm very disciplined and I have a really, really high standard of excellence that I expect everybody in my firm to live up to. But I also allow for the prioritization of first family, second, health, and third work. I don't micromanage. I don't micromanage myself. I don't micromanage my kids. I don't micromanage my wife, and I don't micromanage my work. So I get an enormous amount of leverage by setting the table the way I want it and setting expectations for myself that provide a construct that people can that work with me or live with me or work out with me can see that I hold myself to. And just like I'm inspired by people that live like that. I'm hopeful that they're inspired by me. And you don't need to be there 24/7 and micromanaging every piece for them to sort of understand that and then hold themselves accountable to their own standards of what they want to become.
For sure. So you can set the table and you can have the discipline and work on these axes, but setbacks are going to happen. You
Correct.
mentioned you got a bad injury, bunch of surgeries when you were a young kid. That was early exposure to setbacks. People in their career, they get laid off. You lose a deal. That's a minor one. How do you manage that in your head and, externally? I remember in one of your offices, you had a sign that said, I don't lose, I learn.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you learned that from sports and how else you manage setbacks when they come. Because looking at your resume, it does not look like you've had many setbacks, but I'm
I've
sure
had
you have.
a million setbacks, right? And it's funny, we laugh because every time I build and sell a company, it's like, wow, got that one done. Thank God, right? Because you're always one move or one idea or one pivot away from failure every single time. It's what I said at the very beginning. Like to be elite, there's constant pressures trying to pull you down to good enough, right? To be elite in business, to be an elite in athletics, to be elite in academics, to be elite as in anything you do. There's pressure trying to get you out of there. There's people trying to attack you, right? That makes it hard, right? And so, like when you build and sell a company for 400 million, five, whatever that you sell the company for, right? You have to tread a line. The only way you're willing to tread that line is by being really, really resilient to a million failures that happen from the time you decide to start that company to the time you sell it. The other thing is you just have to have absolute conviction, right? It's like if someone says to you, okay, we're going to do 10, we're going to do 100 100s on the minute 15. After the first five, you're like, geez, I got 95 more of these, right? You just have to, the moment the doubt of finishing that set hits your mind, the moment you're thinking for excuses like, gosh, my shoulder's a little bit sore. Can I get out of this? Can I do that? But if you say, I'm not going to allow that to enter my brain, I'm going to finish this and I'm going to make it work. And everybody that's part of this organization or everybody that's part of that swim is going to finish it. The mindset materializes and the resilience and the resolve go hand in hand. You become resilient to a lot of failures based on the resolve that I'm going to make this work. It is always hard though. It is always hard. And every time I run a company, it's like, gosh, this one's not going to work. But something happens when you're intentional, when you really put in the hours, when you're smart about why you're doing it and the reason you're doing it, and you've thought through the constructs of why why it should work. If you put in that work, good things typically happen in sport or whatever. Maybe they're not the exact same things that you thought. Maybe you don't hit the Olympics, even though that was the goal. But there's a lot of really good benefits, side benefits that come from that effort. And sometimes they show up and sometimes they don't. Luckily, they've shown up for me in terms of the outcomes of my companies.
So a lot of these learnings, it sounds like, are what make you the great leader that you are today. But I also know that when you were in your early 30s, when you were finishing up at Harvard Business School, I think that you may have looked at yourself as a leader then. And a lot of people who I think will be watching this will likely be in their 20s, 30s, and they kind of think, oh yeah, I was a leader on the swim team, so I should be a leader in business. But obviously you don't have the skills, the wherewithal, the judgment to show people this is the way we need to go. The only thing you can really have is a conviction. How do you recommend people transition from, like, let's say being a leader in their sport, maybe they're a captain of the Olympic team, to going to almost the ground floor and starting in a career and then working your way up to, let's say, leadership? But there's something that's not quite right about that, because you can be a leader from wherever you sit.
Yep.
At least that's my opinion. I'd love for you to talk a little bit to that if you have some thoughts.
Yeah. So what's interesting about life, and it happens after you graduate from college, and then it happens after your first job, and then it happens after your second job, is um, it quite frankly happens after high school. You go from being the prepubescent kid in high school to the being, in your case, the fastest swimmer in the country by the time you're a senior, right? And you get a lot of confidence, and hopefully that confidence is stored in your body and it gives you some capability of like, okay, I could do that, I succeeded, etc. And then you go to a new level, right? And you go to Stanford, and you're a little bit of an anomaly because you were fast then too. But like most people step up to a higher level and then they're not that good, right? And that either does one of three things. They either accept the status quo and sort of stay where they were. They are like completely deflated by that and end up quitting, or they're inspired by that and say, gosh, the first 4 years of high school, I went from A to Z. I'm starting again at A in college. I'm going to go from A to Z. Then you graduate from college, right? And for me, that was the most demoralizing time of my life. I had gone to Stanford. I was smart. I was like good at what I did. And then I had nothing, right? And nobody cares. Everybody thinks, okay, gosh, you're going to go to Stanford and then you're going to have these doors open up. Or they think that you're going to play water polo for the U.S. Olympic team and then doors are going to open up. They don't, right? Because you're irrelevant. What you did at Stanford as an academic, as a student, is irrelevant to a certain extent to work. What you did as an athlete, irrelevant. I don't want to hire an athlete, right? I want to hire someone who has capabilities that an athlete represents, but I also need skills. So what happens then is you have to say, okay, am I capable of starting at the ground floor? Or do I have an arrogance? Am I tied to what I did before where I was elite? Or am I willing to start at the ground floor? I'll give you an example. So let's go to Stanford. Then I get out and I was like, okay, I'm going to start this restaurant company. Didn't know anything about restaurants, was completely humbled by people that had a fraction of my education level, right? Bureaucrats that were required to get approvals that were requisite for us being able to open that door, dealing with the government to get a liquor license, things that seem so like below a Stanford student. And if I had had the arrogance of a Stanford student when I was dealing with those bureaucrats or dealing with people that represent the liquor license, they could have shut the door in my face. But I took the approach of like, I'm gonna learn this. I'm gonna not like live on the fact that I went to Stanford. I'm gonna open up my eyes and I'm gonna start at the bottom. And I did that, and we got better and better and better, and then we ended up growing that company and selling it. And we opened up like 10 restaurants, and it was a success. But I didn't want to be just like, a lot of people don't want to be athletes for the rest of their life, or they can't. I didn't want to be a restaurant guy for the rest of my life. So I was then at another inflection point, just like after high school or just after college. Okay, now what am I going to do, right? I went back to Harvard Business School with the sense that like doors are just going to open because, gosh, look at this guy. He went to Stanford and then he started and grew and sold a restaurant company. And then he went to Harvard Business School and nobody cared, right? Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to pivot into a new direction. I wanted to go into healthcare. So I had to literally start at the bottom again, right? And even though I was starting at the bottom, I was armed with confidence that had come from those experiences, being an athlete, starting and growing and selling a company, right? So even I was going into healthcare, which I knew nothing about, and quite frankly, nobody cared about me because I had come from the restaurant business. I had an internal assessment, an internal confidence of what I could do as a leader, as a person, right? That I was able to carry with me into that new experience. So even though I was like irrelevant, I had this inner confidence that had come from experiences that other people that weren't athletic or hadn't run a company before didn't have. So I was able to lean on those as I was building up the skills and the capabilities relevant to the specific area that I was focusing on, which is healthcare. And what was beautiful is that because I had done all that other stuff and learned those skills and developed the capabilities around being an athlete and being a leader, my acceleration was pretty fast, right? I had the fundamental capabilities of what I'd proven to myself I could do. And then I just needed to get the skills in the new area, right? And then I was able to become a head of a company and very quickly do it sequentially, serially, like open up, grow, sell companies. Done it 5 times. I think the point is that if you're humble and willing to learn and not tied to the arrogance of what you did before, because nobody cares, you can take the capabilities, the things you learned from that experience and move forward. I'll give you one more example. I've had people that are elite from top schools, elite, number 1 in their class, number 2 in their class from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, that come to work for me. And there's an arrogance with them and they don't last. And then I've had people that are not those people, but they have a humility and a willingness to suck it up and not only for my for benefit, but for their own benefit. And that actually translates to very, very high impact. That's the lesson I would take: the experiences, take the capabilities you've learned, tie it to the frameworks of the quotient compass, always be evaluating where you're weak, where you're strong, be willing to connect the dots to something new, and be humble.
That's really cool. I got to experience that live in the pants from you, actually, and I have you to thank for helping me rip out that ego that, hey, I'm on top of the world and I came from Stanford and I was the best swimmer, so I should be great and worked for you. And 8 weeks in, 6 weeks in, you're like, Nolan, dude, you got to pick it up. So thank you for that. But it sounds like the foundational mindset that you have is anti-victim mindset, pro-growth mindset. And that kind of encompasses these principles of courage and erudition and keeps at bay like any of these negative thoughts that pop in and anything that tells you, oh, you deserve this.
I feel really lucky. I don't feel like I'm good, right? I know I'm competent because I've done it. Literally, it's every time you start something new, you got to create a whole new framework for it. You got to create a whole new approach. What makes people not interesting as people that in profession or in life are people that don't grow. And so like every new opportunity for me is it's an opportunity to connect the dots, but to leverage what I did into something new. If I were to try and follow the same blueprint company after company after company, I would have had one company that worked and four that didn't work, because everything requires a different approach, a different mindset, a different pressure point. It's the ability to sort of sit back and look at, okay, how do I take what I had before, apply it to a new idea, and be different, like a different approach that's made me successful. I would say two other things. One is I live in a world of fear, right? So I don't expect myself to know all the answers. I don't expect my opinions or my thoughts to be right. And so in a world of fear, I'm constantly trying to get information from people that have other perspectives, right? In the healthcare industry, I'm trying to get perspective from people in the entertainment industry. I try and bring in ideas that allow me to know with confidence that I've seen everything and I'm not going to be hit by a blindsided fist because I didn't think through something. So I live in fear. The second thing is I live with urgency, right? Like I really recognize that that time is short. Like I don't want to spend 8 years running a company. I want to spend 4 years running a company, right? But the life cycle of a tech company is 8 years. So 8 years to me, gosh, I hope to be alive 8 years from now. It's not like that's not interesting for me. So I live with urgency. How do we do things faster? And just like, moss doesn't grow fast on a roaring river. It just can't, right? Good things happen when you move, right? Decisions are made. Nothing stagnates, right? And nobody wants to be part of something that stagnates. That's the same with sports. Like you can go jog for 10 miles or you can go do 10, 1 mile sprints. You're going to get so much more out of that 10-mile one sprints than jogging along for 10 miles. That's how I approach my business. It's like rapid based on fear of missing out on something and wanting to get something done so I can go on to the next thing.
That's badass. And I think it's the perfect time to move into the last 3-minute finisher we have, which is just a bunch of rapid fire questions. It's
Great.
only 9 of them. It'll take 3 minutes. Is that good?
Great. Yes.
Cool. All right. First one. What's your morning routine?
Wake up, take a cold plunge, get a Diet Coke.
Let's go. What's your go-to comfort food?
Pizza.
Nice. Can you name a book that has significantly impacted your life?
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
If you could teleport to any place in the world right now, where would it be and why?
I'd show up in Cap Ferrat, south of France.
Why?
Best vacation I ever had with my family.
That's awesome.
Jumping off the cliffs of French Riviera into the
So with your family?
Yep, the best.
Cool. Do you rely on any mental models? And if so, what is the top 1 or 2?
No.
Okay.
I rely on my 4 Qs.
Cool. Favorite song of all time?
God. Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones.
Good one. What famous person or historical figure would you have lunch with if you could?
Napoleon.
What's the best way to get out of a rut?
Action, activity.
And finally, what is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you?
Marry me.
Your wife.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. All right, Duke. Thank you so much. This has been a blast.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
That's a wrap with my conversation with Duke Rohlen. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like the show either on Spotify or YouTube. Visit my website at adavenolan.com to subscribe for more updates. If you thought of someone during the show, please share it with them. I think that Duke's knowledge can go a very long way if someone were to just to sit down and take some notes while listening to it. Please apply what you learned today in your life. Maybe take those 4 Qs and start a framework for yourself. I think it'll go a long way. I'll see you back here in a couple of weeks, and thanks for tuning in.